is the peace in Europe caused by democracies or something different? So I'm not gonna give you a lecture about the history of European Union here. I wanna go straight to the core. What is the inherent value behind this whole European integration, European Union project? So a brief explanation for those of you who are not familiar with it. After the World War II, there was a huge push from politicians to establish a union in Europe to create peace and economic prosperity and to rebuild the broken, continent. So the big step was the founding of Council of Europe in 1949, which was supposed to tackle issues around human rights and democracy and bring the whole continent together. But the issue was the council had almost no power and the members were not really participating as much as they should. So what happened later, this is actually not European Union at this point. You have to remember this. This is just the formation of a couple of countries. And from there, 6 nations of Europe decided to form European Coal and Steel Community in 1952. Now, let's go back, let's backtrack, because this is the foundation of Europe. And they actually refer to this point as like some founding fathers were here, but you know none of these names. So the fundamental is this: based on human rights and democracy, we're gonna create a union that will share these values and then go from there. However, if you look closely into it, it's all based on one theory, and that theory is called democratic peace theory. Now, what that means is, in a nutshell, that democracies don't fight each other because it's counterproductive. So what they do, they tend to trade with each other and build each other up, and this way we will prevent the war because we'll have economic ties between the nations, and this is gonna be the prevention of war in a nutshell. Everybody's using this as their fundamental argument for the European Union peace. So if we look closely into the democratic peace theory, we actually realize one big misconception, and that is correlation does not imply causation. So correlation does not imply causation refers to the inability to logically deduce a cause and effect relationship between two variables solely on the basis of observed association between each other. So basically it's a logical fallacy where two events happen at the same time and you think that there's a correlation between them, therefore there must be a cause and effect relationship, which is not the case maybe. Now if we look into the theory of democratic peace more closely, we'll realize one thing: wait a second, is this even true? Because there's actually a list of wars between democracies on Wikipedia that you can find, and it's actually pretty extensive. And the most notable one probably would be the war in Yugoslavia in 90s, where all 3 countries were actually democracies fighting each other. So now we have to look into this and realize, okay, is this actually true? Is the peace in Europe caused by democracies or something different? Douglas Gilbert and Andrew Osiak in their study found out one correlation, and that is democracies do not cause peace. When the peace is established, then democracies can occur. It cannot be the other way around. So, therefore, if this is the truth, we cannot assume that spreading democracy or democratic peace theory is actually a truth. If you think about it, it's a logical fallacy at this point. The theory that peace actually causes democracy is supported by many studies and theories, psychological studies and cultural studies. So this is something that's established in the scientific community. However, when we look into the political landscape or economics, we don't really find this. So for the sake of the argument, let's assume that, okay, human rights are the basics of European Union. That would assume, based on that value, that you would adhere to those values. However, if we look at democracies around the world, actually, they don't tend to be more peaceful. They are engaged in multiple wars. If you look into the United States or even European troops, they are deployed in the world, and you can actually make an argument for spreading democracy through war to bring it to the people. So you can actually kill somebody based on the idea of human rights, because you're bringing them human rights. So it's a logical fallacy again, and it's a contradiction, because based on human rights, you should say every life is sacred. But you only say that to the European community. However, for non-democracies, then we can just kill them, whatever. Let's just do whatever we want with them. So that's a logical fallacy. If we have that as a core value, we shouldn't be engaged in wars. Again, Something is missing here. Let me get to the point, guys. We're getting there. We're slowly getting there. I'm gonna give you the answer. And so now I want to talk about what I think is actually going on. Look at the bicep. So, I don't think it's democracy and human rights which is the foundation of European Union. I think the foundation of European Union is actually based on trade and economics. Since the Council of Europe was established in 1949 and it failed because member states were not active enough, they didn't have incentive to actually implement human rights or democracy, because people or countries don't operate in this world. Countries only care about their selfish interest, and this is the theory of realism, which, you know, if you study international relations, it's pretty easy. You have the realists and then you have liberals, and those are the major philosophies for foreign policy. And the realism tells you that, hey, there's no such a thing as human rights or democracy because it's all made up, and countries only care about their nation's interest, and that's the underlying motivation for everybody. And you can see how that implies that, so when in 1952 they established the steel and coal community, which was a trade between 6 nations, they were starting to bind the economies together to prevent wars from happening and to establish peace. And what you don't realize, actually, there's a step before that. Like, how did they get the money to do this thing? So actually a big chunk of money was coming from the Marshall Plan, from the United States funding the growth or rebuilding of European Union and these communities. And the United States funded the European Union based on the theory of realism and these democracies kind of working together, because they realized that they need a population in Europe to buy their goods and services in the future, because otherwise they will just produce goods and services in the United States, but nobody will have the purchasing power to buy them because everybody's broke. So they needed to rebuild Europe to create a consumer class, and that's actually what's going on. Now you may think like, okay, this is very similar to democracies cause peace, but no, it's actually caused by 2 things. One underlying thing is capitalism. It's all based on profit and purely capitalistic intentions from the United States side, rebuilding the Europe tying itself together economically, and then implementing these ideas like human rights and everything else. But it's not based on human rights or democracy, because we saw that it didn't work when they did that. Countries are selfish. They want economic benefits. And if you look into even the citizens and what they want, European citizens, number 1 priority is economy and unemployment, or always. So European Union as a organization is actually based on capitalism, first of all, just brutal capitalism, and realism, because it was selfishly motivated by the United States to create a Marshall Plan to rebuild Europe for the consumers. Maybe, yes, you can play that, oh, we are helping the European Union, but we all know that what was happening was building the middle class in Europe. And the question of peace, now let's talk about the peace in Europe since 1945 and onwards. So now the question is this: is the peace in Europe because of economic integrations of the European countries and embracing of human rights and democracy? Or is the peace of Europe based on realism, capitalism, and United States versus Soviet Union kind of being in a Cold War? So Europe was actually like a middle ground for them. So US had a Marshall Plan building out the military bases over here, and the Soviet Union was over there doing the same thing. So we're deterring each other, and they had the nuclear kind of, what's the name for it? Nuclear deterioration or something like that, so that nobody would attack each other. Is that what's going on, or is the actual project of European Union saving the continent? And then when the Soviet Union fell apart, the United States kind of spread over here. And so again, what is motivating the peace in Europe? What is it? Is it truly the European Union? So you tell me, what do you think? Is the peace caused by European Union as a project, kind of artificially boosted? Or is it caused by the underlying principles of realism and capitalism and the United States? Because you can see every country is motivated by economy. And actually, what the theory of democratic peace means, if the economies were not tied in the European Union, they were just purely based on human rights and democracy, we would go to war. We would go to war. But because we are tied economically, we will not do so because it will cost us more to rebuild than to spend on the war. Simple as that. This tells us that countries are inherently selfish, and unless they get economic boost or money, as people are economically selfish, they will wage war. Whether or not they are democracies, they will do so. And if you look at today's world, you'll see the biggest wars in the world are caused by coalition of democracies by United States and European Union. So from realism, it means that not democracies or its absence causes war. The only thing that causes war is consideration and evaluation of power. And when you look at the situation in the Cold War, everybody was calculating, and they agreed that the peace will be the default mode for the next 50 years because we can't afford to go to war and bring about the world to its end. Because in the Cold War, the threat from the communist states was so severe that the democratic nations had to come together to form an alliance, and also NATO, which is a security pact led by the US. So what's the answer, guys? Please tell me, because I've heard so many opinions on this. We've had so many theories at school. I haven't been to school in almost 29, 29, in almost 7 or 6 years. I don't know when I graduated, but something like that. And so this is just revisiting my old notes and some ideas that I have about EU and the world, because people use logical fallacies in their arguments. And just let's go back to the basics. What the hell is going on? What world are we living in? Is it based on some ideals, or is it based on the hard truth of selfishness of human beings, and therefore the countries that we're in? Hey, who are you? Tell me, are you more a realist or more like a liberal democracy person? I would love to hear your thoughts, and let me know what you want to see in the comments below, because I would love to cover topics such as this or something else. I try to look into like the basic ideas. I don't try to look into like surface level things. So if you have something deep that you want to go into, let me know. I would love to do that. So this was Jan, and I beg you to subscribe and leave me a comment, because otherwise I have no feedback from you, and therefore I don't know what to do if this is working. Thank you again, and let's keep in touch.